Code Explain says hi. Today's project is the budget app. So this is what we are going to create in this tutorial. So we're going to use just vanilla JavaScript, no framework. So in our app we have here the balance, the income and the outcome. And here is dashboard, and we have here an all button, an income button and an expenses button. This is the buttons I use to toggle between the lists. So now I am showing the list for all, means I am showing the incomes and the expenses entries in this list. Now if I click on the income button, I am now showing the list of the income entries and the inputs to add a new income. Here, this is the expenses button. If I click on this, I am now on the list for the expenses list or entries, and here I have the inputs to add a new expense. Let's try that. I'm gonna go and add the title, rent, for example, say 1000. If I click on add button here, now we can see that we added the entry to our list, we updated the outcome and the balance, and also a chart. This chart here is going to make it easy for our user to compare the income and the outcome. Now I will go and add an income, let's say project 1000. Now you can see that we added that to our list, we updated the income, now it's 1000, and updated the balance, now it's 0, and also the chat again. If I go to the all list, I can find my entries there. The expenses in red and the income in black. Now I will go to add a new income entry. I'm gonna add, for example, salary. When I add this, you can see here that the new entry is now at the top of the list. So whenever I add a new entry, it goes to the top of the list. Now I will go for all here, the list that shows all the entries. If I click on this button here, the trash button, I can remove that from our entry list. And also when I delete one of them, or an entry, I update the whole thing again, the outcome, the income, and the balance. And also I can edit an entry. For example, if I want to edit this entry here, I will go to the income list and then hit the button edit. Now you can see that we updated the balance, the income and the outcome, and also I have the entry title and amount in my inputs, so I can edit, for example, the amount. Now the last thing about our app, I can go, for example, and refresh the page, and you can see that I still have all the data there because we save the data to our local storage. This is an easy project to build. I'm going to say the logic behind the whole code before going and typing the code. So let's go. So first we're going to talk about the HTML elements. So we're going to need a container for our budget app. Then inside we have a title, and then the header. Inside we have the balance, its title and the value. Then the account, which has the income with the title and the income total. That's what we're going to change. Then the chart, and then the outcome. Then we have our dashboard with a title and a toggle menu which has 3 buttons: expenses, income, and all. The active one right now is income. When I click on expenses, this one will be activated and these will be deactivated. And of course, we are going to show the right list. So we have here 3 elements, one for expense, income, and all. So these have all the same HTML code inside. I'm going to talk just about the one inside the income. So we have here an input dev, or where we can add actually our entries. So inside we have a text type input to add a title for our entry, and then here we have a number type input to add the amount, and last we have the add income button here, a plus icon. So when I click on the add button here, I add my entry to the list. Here is the list, it's a UL element, and then the entry is an LI element with an ID. So every entry has a unique ID, and then we have that entry title and amount inside, then the edit button and the delete button. So that's it for the HTML. Now we're going to select those elements. So we need to change them. So we need to select all the elements we need. So first we're going to select the balance element here, and then the income total element and the outcome total element. Then here the chart element also, then the toggle buttons, the expense button, income button, and all button. And now our expense element, income element, all element. This is the whole element from here, from the top here till here. So including inside the expense element, we have the list and the input. Right, we have the list here. So income list, expense list, and all list. And then we have here the inputs. Now we're going to talk about toggling. So for example, we have in expenses here, it shows the list for expenses. Now if I click on the income, it shows the list for the income entries. So these buttons are selected and we call them expense button, income button, and all button. Now the difference between an active and inactive button is just the opacity of that element. So for example here the opacity is 1, right? Here for example it's around 0.5. I'm adding here important here rules, so I will override every old rule in the CSS or the style of that element. Now it's easy. When I click on the expenses here, I need to add this class name called active to this element, and of course remove it from the income button. In JavaScript, to add a class name to an element, you're gonna need to select the element like we did here, then get the class list of that element. So this will return a list of all the class names of our element. And then I'm going to use a method called remove to remove the active. So if I use this on a class name, this will return it inactive like this. But instead, if I say class list that add active, this will make it active like here in income button. To actually do this, I need to listen for when the user clicks on one of these buttons, which means I'm gonna need to add an event listener to these buttons here, a click event. When the user clicks on one of these buttons, this function here will fire up. Now, when I click on the expense button, I need to activate the expense button, and then I want to make inactive or deactivate all the other buttons, the income button and all button. This is an array here, so I'm gonna put the buttons in an array. Now the active here function is taking just one element, but the inactive here is taking more than one element, and I put them inside an array. Now when I click on the income button, it's gonna be active the income button, inactive the expense button, and the all button. When I click on the all button, it's gonna be active the all button and inactive expense button and income button. Now when I click on the expenses back, right? We want to make this active and this inactive, but also we need to hide and show the exact or the right list. So when I click back on the expenses, I need to hide the one for income, the list of the income, and I want to show back the list of the expenses. So of course we have selected those elements, the expense element, income and all. What we need now is to go to our CSS file and add a hide class name with the display property set to none. So whenever I add this class name to one of these elements, it will make it hidden. So we're going to do it the same way here. So we're going to get to the class list of the element, remove the hide to show the element, and add hide to hide the element. So here when I click on the expense button, I need to show the expense element. And when I click on the expense button, I want to hide the income element and all element. Again, the show function here is taking just one element, but the hide function, like the inactive function, it's taking an array of elements. And when I click on the income button, I want to show the income element and hide the expense element and all element. And when I click on the all button, we need to show the all element but hide the expense and income elements. There is a better way of doing this, but I still prefer to do it this way. Now here we're going to talk about our functions. Let's talk about the active function. So our active function is taking just one element. Now what it does with that element here, to make an element activate, we add the active class name to the class list of that element. So that's what the function active will do. Now for the function show, it also takes in just one element and it removes the hide class name from the class list of that element. Now for our hide function here, just not take in one element but two elements, and they are inside an array. Now all what we want to do now to hide those elements is to add to each one of them the hide class name. So here we have an array, so we need to go one by one, which means I'm going to use a for loop that starts from 0 and at the last one, at the last element, and then each time go by 1. And then for each element inside our elements array, I will get to the class list and add the hide class name, right? So this is a way of doing it, but I still prefer to use the for each method, which is simple because I'm gonna type less code. So I'm just gonna go and say for each element inside our elements array. So this is really simple. So for each element inside our elements array, run this code. So the code as element, the class list, add hide. So this will do exactly what the for loop does, but with less typing code, so you won't, for example, make more mistakes in your code. And now for the inactive function, just gonna be the same thing. So I'm gonna say for each element inside the elements array, remove the active class name from the class list of every element. Okay, now we're going to talk about add an entry. So let's say we are in the dashboard here. We are going to add an income. So we type the title and the amount, and then we're going to click on this button here. So this button is selected using the query selector method, and we assigned it to a variable called add income. So what we need now is to add an event listener to the add income variable, which is a click. Whenever I click on this function will fire up. So now we are not talking about showing this to the user, we are talking about saving those informations the user typed in. So we need to know what is the value of our income title and the value of the income amount. It's simple. We're gonna just say income title that value and income amount that value. Now this is the informations of our entry, right? Now we need to save all our entries somewhere. The best place, of course, is an array. So we're going to create a variable called entry list, which is an array. Now our entry has a lot of informations or properties. It has like the title, the amount, and the type, or it's an income or it's an expense, etc. So we need to save those elements inside our entry list as objects. So I'm gonna create an object called income. Here is the title and here is the amount, and of course the type, which is an income there. Now when I type in 8,000 here, it looks like it's a number, but it's an HTML input and it returns a string. So this is actually not a number, this is a string. So when I say income amount, that value, this is a string. So I will need to use the parsefloat function here. So I will convert this string here to a number. I need to convert it to a number because we are doing some maths later on. Now I will need just to push the income here, our object here, with all these properties inside our entry list. For those who doesn't know what the push method does, let's say we have a list, an array with these elements. Now if I say list.push 10, the element, a number, I'm going to push it to the list. If I take a look on the list, I will find the old elements and the last element will be the one I pushed, which is 10. So that's what the push method does. Now after I pushed the element to our entry list, then I'll need to show the entry into the list. So for that we're going to use the update UI function here that we are going to talk about in a minute. And then after this we need to clear these inputs here, right? So I'm gonna use a function called clear input. We have two inputs here, so I'm gonna pass them to this function as an array. Now the clear function will just go and for each input in that input array, it will set the value of the input to an empty string. That's how we clear an input. Now, of course, we don't want to add the entry to our list here if the user typed in just the title and not the amount, or he didn't type any of them. So, of course, we need to do a check to see if this income title or the income amount is empty. So, if one of them is empty, then we don't need to run this code here. So that's why we say return. So return here will prevent this code here from running if what's inside is true. So if the income title or the income amount, then we return. So we're going to use the logical operator or, and we're gonna say if not income title that value or not income amount that value. So for example, if the income title that value is filled, it's not empty, this will return true. Not true, it's false. So this won't executed, so we run this code. But instead of the income if the income title that value is empty, then this will return false. Not false is true, then this is true, then it will return and prevent this code from getting executed. Now we're going to do the same thing for when we are in the expenses list. So we type in the title and the amount, and then we click on the add expense there. So here we need to add an event listener to the add expense button, and then this is the expense title and the expense amount. We're going to get the title and the amount with converting that string to a float. The type here is now expense. Then we're going to push that expense into our entry list. Then we update the UI to show that to the user, and then clear the inputs, right? And of course we need to do the check again if those inputs are empty or not. Now, based on these examples, if we take a look on the entry list, this is what we get. So our entry list here is an array, right? Then the first element with the index 0 is an object, which has these properties, the amount, 8,000, this is a number, right? That's why we use the parse float here. This is the title, salary, it's a string. Then the type is an income, right? Now, if we go to the next one, its index is 1. Now the amount 2000, a number, the title is rent, and type is expense. What I want to say here is, for example, if we take a look on this entry here, we will find that it's an li element with the class income, right? Then inside we have a div with the class entry, so here salary 8,000, then the button edit and the button delete. Now this is 8,000, the amount, this is salary, the title, this is the income, the type. Now the ID of the li element here is 0, and it's the index of the entry inside our entry list. So what I'm saying here is that we have a link between the HTML code and the entry inside our entry list. So the ID of the entry in the HTML code is the index of that entry inside our entry list. For example, for this one here, it will be an li with the class expense, its type here, then the ID will be 1, then the rest of the code. So this is really important. Now, an entry in general have 4 properties: the type, the title, the amount, and the index, which will be the ID of the li element. Now we need to know how to calculate the balance, the income, and the outcome. So let's say we have this list here. We added this list. Now if we take a look on the entry list, this is what we're gonna get. Now if I ask you to calculate the income as a human, what you're going to do is you'll go and enter the entry list array. You'll go to the first one, right? Now you are calculating the income, so you're gonna say the type here is income. Yes, then I want this amount, 8,000. Now let's save that. Then you will go to the next one, right? You will find that the type here is expense. No, I don't want that. Then you will go to the next one. You'll find again the type is income. Yes, we need the amount. Then you add up 8,000 and 2,000. It's now 10,000. Then you go for the last one. The type here is again expense. I don't want that. Now it's 10,000 for the income. Now for the outcome, we're going to add up those with the type expense. 2,000 with 1,000 is $3,000. Now for calculating the income or the outcome, we're going to use the same function called calculate total. Now this function here will take in the type, which may be the income or the expense, and then our entry list. Then we'll go and use a for each method on our entry list. We will loop over all the entries one by one and then check if the entry that type is the type we are looking for. Is it the income or the expense? If it's true, then we add up those amounts. The sum here is a variable we define outside the for each method. We set it to 0. Then after this finishes, we get the sum here, which is the total of all the amounts with the type income. Now to calculate the income, I have to say income equals calculate total, the type income inside our entry list. If I want to calculate the total of outcome, I'm going to say calculate total expense entry list. Now the last thing is to calculate the balance. All we're going to do is subtract the outcome from the income. 10,000 minus 3,000 is 7,000. So the balance is simply the income minus the outcome. but I still gonna put this inside the function called calculate balance that takes in the income and the outcome, and it returns the income minus outcome. So here I'm gonna say balance equals calculate balance, the income and the outcome. Now let's talk about showing an int array. Now this is where we need to show the int array in our list here. So let's say now I will add an int array, an income int array. So this is the title, this is the amount. When I click on the button, to remind you, we go first and calculate the income and the outcome, then calculate the balance. And the last thing, of course, is show the int array in the list. So this is a UL list. We have a list for all, we have a list for income, we have a list for expenses. And we targeted them like these: the income list, expense list, and all lists. Now the HTML for this entry is like this. It's an LI with an ID with the class, which is the type, then the rest of the code. Now it's simple. All we're gonna do is to go and search for the entry in the entry list array and then add this HTML code based on the information saved in the entry list array and add that HTML code to one of these lists here. Some of you could say we're just going to use the inner HTML to add our entry. So the entry here is just this whole code here, this li element. And we are using a plus equal sign here because we don't want to overwrite those old entries in our list. So for example, what we will get if we use the inner HTML this way, when we add the first entry and we come and add another entry, this is what we will get. For me, I don't want things to be like this. I want them actually to be like so. So if I add the first entry and then I came and add another one, I want the new entry will be always at the top. So to achieve this, I will use the insert adjacent HTML method. This takes in the position and the entry here, the HTML code we want to add into our list. What is the position here? Okay, let's say we have a parent element and inside we have three lists. List 1, 2, 3, exactly like here. Now if I want to add the entry into my lists number 2, I will say list2 dot insert adjacent HTML position, and let's say we need to add this string here, test, into our list 2. There are 4 different positions where we can add the test here in our list number 2. First, this is the begin of our element and this is the end of our element. If we say before began, this will add test right here between the list number 1 and the list number 2. Test now is outside this element. Now after began, we'll add it just after the beginning of the list number 2. So for example, if there was a first child in our list 2, the test now will be the new first child. If we say before end, then this will be just at the end of our element list 2. So for example, if there was a last child in our list 2, this now will become the new last child. And then if we say after end, this will be outside the list 2 and between the list 2 and the list 3. Now of course the position to achieve this here is after begin. So the code for this show entry. So this is the HTML code, right? This is where the ID goes. The ID here of this li element is just the index of this entry inside our entry list, if you remember. Then the class name here is the type of that entry. Then here it's the title and the amount. So here we're going to set this to a constant called entry. This is a backtick. This is called a literal expression. This is not a single quote. Now, in the position we said it will be after began, then to our list, one of these lists, expense or income or all, does insert adjacent HTML with the position after began and our entry here. Now I will put all this code because I will reuse it inside the function called showEntry. The showEntry function will take in as parameters the list, then the type, the title, the amount, and the ID of the entry we want to show to the user interface. Now let's talk about the update UI. The update UI is called whenever I click on this button here. So the first thing the update UI function will do when I click on this button here, the function update will go and calculate the income. So each time I click on the button, of course the income and the outcome and the balance will change, right? So update UI will always go first and calculate the income using the calculate total and then show that to the user. So here the income will be 8,000 after I add this. Then the outcome here also, we're going to use the calculate total. The type is expense inside our entry list, and of course update the inner HTML of our outcome total element. This will be 0. There is no expense, for example. And then the balance, we're going to use the calculate balance, income and outcome. So 8,000 minus 0, it's gonna be 8,000. Then after updating the balance, income and outcome, what we're going to do is now showing the entry to the user. Before showing the entry to the user, we need first to clear our lists using the function clear element. We are going to clear all the lists, the income, expense, and all lists. Why? Because we don't need to show our entry, all the old entries, a second time. The clear element is taking an array, then use a for each method to loop over the elements and then set each element inner HTML to an empty string. Now to add an entry to our income list, for example, we're gonna say show entry income list, then entry.type, entry.title, and entry.amount. The entry here is the entry from our entry list. The index here is going to be the ID of the li element, if you remember. Then if we want to show the entry in the expense list, we're going to say here expense list, and last for our all list. Now for the expense list, we're going to add or to show just the entries with the type expense. For the income, we're going to show only the entries with the type income. But for all list, we're going to show all the types, the income and the expense. So here we're going to use an if statement. So if the entry.type is an income, add it to the income list. If it's expense, add it to the expense list. Right? From where we get these entries here, it's our entry list. So we're going to use again a for each method. So for each entry inside our entry list, we're going to run this code. Now this entry here is just the entry inside our entry list. So this element here has a type, a title, and the amount. Right? Now the index here is this one. Now how do I get this index here, which is gonna be the ID of the li element inside our lists here? I'm just going to pass the entry, the element, and the index here as parameters to this function here. Now after running this code here, this will show all these entries in our lists. Now the last thing is update the chart. The update chart function takes in the income and the outcome variables and the chart goes here. Okay, one last thing. Let's say we added an expense here, rent, 2000. When I add this will go and calculate the income, the outcome, and the balance, right? So the outcome now is 2000. No income, 0. The balance now is 0 minus 2000. And this will be shown like this. $sign then minus 2000. We don't want actually to show this like this. We want it to be shown like this. A minus first, then the $sign, and then the balance, and then the balance value. To get this result, we are going to create a variable called sign. So we are going to determine the sign of the balance first. So we're going to say f, this is the ternary operator. So f, the income is greater or equal than the outcome, then the balance will be positive. So the sign will be just $1. But if the outcome is greater than the income, then the balance will be will have a negative sign. Then we use this sign here, minus $. Now the HTML code of our balance element will be like this. So here inside the small tag, we are gonna say $sign. So this will result a minus $, then minus 2000, because the balance is still negative. Income minus outcome, 0 minus 2000 is still minus 2000. Now to fix this, I'm gonna use the absolute method. What the absolute method here does is it will return a positive number of a given number. For example, if it's 4, then it will return 4. If it's minus 4, then it's gonna be 4. So now this equals to minus 2000. Method abs of minus 2000 is 2000. So we are always showing the absolute value of our balance because we determined the sign by ourselves. And then last, we update the chart again. So now we're going to talk about the function update chart. So whenever I add an entry, we update the chart right away. So the update chart function goes inside our update UI function, if you remember. So here, these elements here has a class name called chart. We are going to select that element using query selector. Then inside here, we're going to create a canvas element. So I'm going to use the create element method. The tag name is canvas. So this will create a canvas element. Then I will append the canvas as a child to our chart element. So this is the result of this line. Now I want to set the width and the height of our canvas to 50 pixels for both. So this is our result if we take a look on the HTML code. So in other words, the canvas now is a rectangle with a width of 50 pixels and a height of 50 pixels, without the borders, of course. Now to draw on the canvas, to draw shapes like rectangles, circles in our case, anything, polygons, you need to get the context of the canvas. So the context here is an object, right? This will return an object that has many properties and methods. For example, the fill style method here is the color width you want to fill your shapes. For example, the stroke style here is the color of the stroke. Here the methods like the fill rect here is a function we use to draw a rectangle, and arc function here is used to draw a circle, for example. So this is what we're going to use here. So to draw a circle, I'm going to say context here, this object, that arc. To draw the circle in our canvas, we need to set its x position, which is the amount of pixels from the left side of the canvas, and the y position, which is the amount of pixels from the top of the canvas. Now the x and y position is the position of the center of our circle. Then the radius of the circle, then the start angle. So the start angle, for example, will be 0. The start angle means from which angle you want to start drawing your circle. Is it 0 or 1 pi or any other angle? Then the end angle. If we say, for example, the end angle is 0.5 times pi, this will draw the circle from this angle here to this angle here. So we'll draw just this part here. If we say it's 1 times pi, then it will draw a circle from 0 to 1 pi here, half the circle. If it's 1.5 times pi, then we'll draw the circle all the way up here without this part here. So to draw a full circle, you need to set the start angle as 0 and the end angle as 2 times pi. Now you will draw a circle or a full circle. Now the last parameter is the anti-clockwise. So this is optional. You can set this parameter or you can just left it that way. If you left it that way, by default, it's false. If it's false, then it's not anti-clockwise, it's clockwise. So what this means, if anti-clockwise is false, then when you draw the circle from 0, then it will draw the circle clockwise. But if you say true, then it will draw the circle anti-clockwise. You can see what's the difference. Yes, there is a difference. For example, let's say the start angle is 0 and the end angle is 0.5 times pi. If you say false, clockwise, this will draw this part here from 0 to 0.5 times pi. But if you say the other way, anti-clockwise, this will draw from 0 going anti-clockwise till 0.5 times pi. This is not the same thing. So the first time you get this part here and the second part anti-clockwise, you will get this part here. So for us, we're going to draw a circle for the income and a circle for the outcome. So we're going actually to draw two circles, one on top of the other, right? For example, let's say the outcome comes as 1000 and the income comes with 1000. So both are equal, which means the outcome will take half of this circle and the income will take the other half. The outcome here, color, is gonna be red and the income is gonna be white. They both start from 0, right? The both circles will start from 0. One will go clockwise and the other one will go anti-clockwise. Now for the circle that will go clockwise, we will use 0, 0.5, 1, 1.5 pi. We are going to use positive numbers or positive angles. If we go clockwise, we use positive angles, but if we go anti-clockwise, we're going to use negative numbers, right? Or negative angles. So 0, minus 0.5 pi, minus 1 pi, and minus 1.5 pi. Now the question is how much for example, the income or the outcome will take from a circle here. The ratio, for example, or the percentage, or whatever you want to call that. I'm gonna call it the ratio. So the question is, what is the ratio of the income and the ratio of the outcome? So enough talking. Let's see an example. Let's say the outcome and the income comes like this. So the income is 1,500. The outcome is 500, right? Now we are drawing two circles. Both the circles have the same center or the same position. So I'm going to use the arc method. The x is canvas that width divided by 2, canvas that height divided by 2. So that's how you get the center of the canvas. Now the radius will be 20 pixels for both. They have the same radius. They will both start from the angle 0, right? And they both will go to 2 times pi. And the one will go clockwise, the other one will go anti-clockwise. And there here is going to be the ratio. Okay, if one goes, for example, 50%, the other one will go also 50%. If one of them goes just 25%, the other one will go 75%. Now, how can we calculate this ratio here for the income, for example? We're going to say 1,500 divided by the income plus the outcome. And this will come as 0.75, which is 75%. So the ratio now of the income is 0.75, which means the circle of the income will take 75% of our circle, right? Then the outcome here, I can use just the same formula, but I'm not using that because I know that the ratio of the income and the outcome always add up to 1. So I'm going to just say 1 minus 0.75, which is 0.25. So now this is the ratio of the income and this is the ratio of the outcome. So the income will take 75% of the circle and the outcome will take just 25% or the rest of the circle. Now, before using the arc method, you should use the function or the method begin path, and after this we're going to use the function or the method stroke to actually draw the stroke. First we need to set the color using the stroke style. The color might be red for outcome or white for the income. I'm going to put all of these inside the function because I'm going to call the function one time for the income and the other time for the outcome. These function here, draw circle, will take in as parameters the color, then the ratio, and then anti-clockwise, which is going to be false or true. If it's false, then it's clockwise. If it's true, then it's anti-clockwise. Now to draw in this example the circle for the income, I'm going to say draw circle, the color white, right? Then the ratio is 0.75, right? And then true, because we're going anti-clockwise. And remember, as we are going anti-clockwise, we're going to use negative angles. So I'm going to use here, I'm going to add a negative sign. Okay, so now minus 0.75 is the ratio, minus 0.75 times 2 is minus 1.5. So we're going to draw from 0 till minus 1.5 pi. So this will draw the circle this way. I'm using here the yellow color because the circle is already white. Now to draw the other one for the income, I'm going to say draw circle with the color red. Then here I'm going to say 1 minus the ratio of the first one. Then here false. Then this will drop from 0, 0.25 here. 0.25 times 2, it's 0.5. So this will drop from 0 to 0.5. Now because I am going to reuse these lines again, I'm going to say here minus ratio and here 1 minus ratio. To calculate the ratio, we're going to use this formula where we say income divided by the income plus the outcome. Right? Now I'm going to put this in a function called Uptitled Chapter, which takes in the income and the outcome. So now the last thing is, for example, let's say we draw a rectangle here, right? And we come back and draw a circle in the same position of that rectangle. The problem here is that the canvas will keep the old rectangle, right? To prevent that, we need first, before drawing any new shape, to clear the canvas. To clear the canvas, we're going to use this method here that takes in the X and Y from where you want to clear the canvas, which is the stop here, till the width of the canvas and the height of the canvas, which means we're going to clear the whole canvas. Now we are going to talk about the delete or edit function. So let's say we have these entries here, and once we add them or enter them, we update the outcome and the income. So the outcome here is 2000, the income is 8000, and the balance is 6000, right? Now when I click on this button here to delete this entry, it will disappear from the user interface. But before that, to achieve that, we need first to delete that entry from our array list entry. So to achieve that, we're going to use the splice method. For example, if I have an array and I use the splice method, the splice method will take in the index and how many elements you want to remove from that array. An example, let's say we have a list with these elements A, B, C, D. Let's say we need to remove this element here. The B here index is 0, 1, so it's 1. So I'm going to say list.splice, then the index is 1 because I want to remove B. Now how many elements you want to remove from the index 1? Do you want to remove B and C and D? Then it's going to be 3. Do you want to remove B and C? Then it's going to be 2. Do you want to remove B only? Then it's going to be 1. In our case, we are going to remove just one entry, so it's going to be 1. Now if we take a look into our list, it will be A and C and D, and B is gone. Now that's the exact same thing a function called delete entry will do. So the delete entry function will take in the entry I clicked on and then use the splice method on our entry list. The splice method here takes in the entry, which is the ID of our entry, and then how many elements? It's only 1. It's only that entry, right? Now when I click on the delete button, we remove this from the user interface, and also we need to update the whole thing again. So for example, the outcome will be 0, and then the balance will be 8000, and the income will remain the same. So this means simply whenever I click on the delete button, I update the whole UI, which means after this line here, after removing the entry from the entry list, I will go and update the UI calling this function. Now when I click on the edit button here, it will call a function called edit entry. Now what this function will do is will take the amount and the title of that entry and put them back in this inputs here. And of course the second thing is update the income and the outcome. Now the income is 0 and the balance also is 0. So also delete that entry from our list. So simply the edit button, besides taking the informations into inputs here, it will do the same as the delete function here, the delete entry function. It will remove that from the list and then update the whole thing. So in our edit entry function, besides adding these to the inputs, it will delete the entry at the end. So this will use an if statement to check whether it's an income or an expense. If it's an income, we're going to add those informations into the inputs of the income. If it's an expense type, it will add the amount and the title to the expense inputs. So I'm going to say if the entry type is an income, if the entry type is an expense, here you're going to update the value of the income amount and the income title. And if it's expense, you will update the value of the expense amount and the expense title. Now this entry here is just simply the entry inside our entry list, right? So to get that entry, all I want to do is say let entry equals the entry list array with the index entry.id. Now before calling these functions here, delete or edit entry, we need first to know on which button the user clicked. Was it the edit button or the delete button? So another problem here is that, for example, let's say we have a 100 entry in our list. Of course, we're not going to add an event listener to each of those buttons, right? That's not the way we're going to do it. Actually, we're going to add an event listener to the income list, to the whole list, right? So we're adding just 3 event listeners to our 3 lists here, right? Now we have the list, okay? So this is our list, and inside we have our li element with an id 0, for example, for the first entry. Then inside the li we have a div with the class entry, for example, let's say salary 8,000, the title and the amount, and then the div with the id edit, okay, this is an id with the icon I edit, and then a div with the id delete with the icon delete. So now we are adding an event listener to the list here. This list might be the income, expense, or all lists. Whenever I click on the list or inside the list, whenever I click on anything here, this will call the function delete or edit. The function delete or edit, we will talk about it in a minute. Now our delete or edit function will take in as a parameter the event, the click event. Now if I take a look on our event object, the click event inside my console, this is what I will get. The click event has some properties to target, buttons, client X, etc. What is important for us is the target. So I got this log here when I clicked on an edit button. How do I know that? Because the target here says when you clicked on a div. Yeah, of course, this is a div, this is a div, this is a div, and then this is the symbol of an ID, right? You clicked on a div with the ID edit. Which one here has the ID edit? It's this one here. So I know exactly on which element I clicked. So I clicked exactly on the edit button. Okay, now the idea is I added the event listener to the list, but I still can listen to the click on any one of these elements. So simply to know the clicked element or the targeted element, I'm gonna say target button equals event.target. So this is how I know the clicked button. Now for these elements here, for these buttons here, this is what we call the parent node or the parent element, right? So I will need to get the parent node. Whenever I click on the edit or the delete button, I need to know what is their parent node or the parent element. Because the parent element is just gonna be our entry. The entry we pass into our delete entry and the edit entry. Because if you remember, this li here has an ID, and that ID is the index of that entry inside our entry list. That was the link. So the whole thing here is just to get this ID here, right? To get this ID here, I will just say ID equals entry.id. This entry here, which is the parent node of the button I clicked on. So the function delete or edit will take in the event, the click event, right? Then it will determine the target button, right? Using the target property here. And then the entry we pass into the delete entry and edit entry is just gonna be the target button dot parent node. Then I will use an if statement. I will say if the target button dot id is equal to delete, this id here, then I clicked on the delete button, then I want to delete the entry from the entry list. But if it's edit, then I want to edit the entry. Now we need to talk about saving the data into our local storage. So we don't want our user to type in all its data, and when he turned off its computer and came back later, he will not find the data there. So to save the data into our local storage, we're going to use the method setItem. The setItem will take in the key. The key here is for example, you are saving data, a lot of data into your local storage, a lot of values, then you want to get back those data. When you want to get back those data, you need to use that key, right? So every data in your local storage has a key. And then the value you want actually to save into your local storage. Now to get that item from the local storage, you're going to use the getItem method that takes in the key. Now before saving the items and get those items from the local storage, you need to know something. So if we have, for example, an object here or an array here, before saving it to our local storage, we need to convert that array to a JSON string. Also, if we need to save an object, which is our case, we need to convert that to a JSON string. So we have a JavaScript object of value. Before setting that item to our local storage, we need to convert it to a JSON string. To do that, we need to use the stringify method. And of course, when we need to get the items from our local storage, we're not going to use them as a JSON string. We need to convert them back to a JavaScript object or value. In that case, we're going to use the parse method. So, to set the item in our local storage, we're going to use a key. The key I'm going to be using is the entry list. And then we save the entry list array. So this is where all our data lives. And before that, of course, I'm going to use the stringify to convert this array here to a JSON string. Now, when do we set the item to our local storage? This line of code here will be executed inside our update UI function. So whenever we call the update UI function, we will update our local storage. Now, when the user comes back and run our app later on, we need to get the items from the local storage using the getItem method that takes in the key, which is the entry list. Now this will return a JSON string, so we need to pass the data to convert it to a JavaScript array. Then we set this to our entry list, and then we need to update UI so the data inside will take effect. Now the problem is, what if this is the first time the user is using this app, so there's nothing inside our local storage? So in that case, this will return an error. To prevent that from happening, we are going to create our valuable entry lists, right? And here we're going to say, if there is data in our local storage, set it to our entry list, or if there is none, set the entry list as an empty array. Now, I think you are ready to type in the code, but first, if you are not already subscribed, hit the button and subscribe, and also hit the bell to get notified about every new video. So let's go and open our text editors. So to follow along with me, you will need to go to the repo on GitHub. You'll find the link in the description. So from there, you will need to go to the repos and choose the budget app JavaScript. And here you'll go and download the starter template. So I will copy this to my desktop, and then I will open my text editor and open the folder I downloaded from the repo. Inside you will find the font and the icons, then the budget.js, the chart.js, index, and the style CSS already typed. Inside the index.html, I'm gonna create a basic HTML file. I'm gonna give this a title. I'm gonna go live. Then we're going to create the container. I forget to link the style sheet. Inside the app title, I'm going to type in code explained. Then the budget header, which contains the balance, a value, and a title. Then I will add a div with the class name account. Inside we have the income, its title, income, and also the value. I'm just gonna copy that. It says income total. Then here it's the chart, and then the outcome element says outcome. Then the budget dashboard, the title, and then the toggle menu with 3 buttons, tab 1, tab 2, and 3. So one for the expense list, one for the income list, and all list. Now if I add active here, you can see that all now is activated. Then I'm gonna add the expense element with the list inside and the inputs, one for the title and the other one for the amount. So the name is title and the placeholder says title. So I forgot to put this actually inside the div with the class name input. I'm just gonna copy this. Here I'm gonna say the type is number. Then it's now the expense title here, not amount. $0 and name is amount. Now I'm gonna add the add expense button, which is an image, the icon plus.png. I'm just gonna go and copy the whole thing. Now this is the one for all, and this one here gonna be for the income. I'm gonna change this to income and then save. The class name here is hide, to hide those elements. So by default, the all list is what we show to the user. Okay, so now I'm gonna go and link my script files, budget.js and chart.js. I'm gonna open the budget.js file. The first thing is we're going to select the elements. So the balance element, I will use the query selector method. Then this is for the income total element, and here the outcome total element, and here it's gonna be the income element, then the expense element, then the all element. Now here the list for income and the list for expense and the list for all. Now the selectors, the CSS selectors for those elements. Here it's gonna be an ID, so all. Now the ID income, then the class name list, the ID expense or outcome, that list, and there all and that list. I'm gonna select the buttons to toggle the lists. I'm gonna just copy this. So this is gonna be tab 1, tab 2, tab 3. This is for income button. This is for all button. Now I need to select the inputs. So add expense. Then the expense title. This is the input for the title of the int array. Expense title input. And then the amount. The expense amount. I will copy these 3 lines. So now I'm just gonna change expense to income for all of them. Now I'm gonna create some variables, then some event listeners, and then our functions. For the variables, we need the entry list, which is gonna be an empty array, then some variables like the balance, the income, and the outcome, and some constants like delete for the delete button. So this is the ID of the buttons, delete and edit. Now inside the event listener, we're gonna add an event listener to the buttons expense button and income button and all button. So when we click on them, we add a new, when we click on them, actually we need to hide or toggle between the lists. So we're going to use some functions like show. Show here we need to show the expense element, and here we need to hide the income element and all element. Here we need to activate the expense button, and here we need to make the other buttons inactive. So income button and all button. So I'm just gonna copy this because we're gonna do the same thing. Here it's gonna be income instead. Here it's gonna be expense instead. Here it's gonna be income button, and here it's gonna be expense button. I'm just gonna copy that again. Now it's gonna be all. Now it's gonna be expense, all button again, and then expense button. Now I'm gonna go and create those functions. So the first function will be show, takes in just one element. I will get the class list of that element, and I will delete or remove the hide class name from that element. Now for the hide function, it will take in an array of elements. Now for each element inside the elements array, I will add to its class list the class name hide. That way I will hide the element. I'm just gonna copy this for the functions active and inactive. Beside it's gonna be here active, and here it's gonna be also active. Let's try that. Oh, so it's not working. Something's wrong. Okay. So yes, I have to say here remove, add, and here I have to say add, not remove. Add the active class name and add and remove the active class name from there. So now if I check that, it's working just fine. To see the elements, I'm gonna open the inspector. So here the elements. So if I click on income, now the income is visible, the others are hidden. If I click on all now is visible and the other two are hidden. Now we need to add entries to our list. So here I'm gonna add an event listener to add expense and add income. So on click event, we need to check if the inputs are empty. If they are, we need to exit. If just one of them, that's why we use the logical OR operator. If just one of them is empty, then we exit. We don't execute this code. We need to save the entry to our list entry, our array. I'm gonna create, or I'm gonna save entries as objects. The type here is expense. The title is expense title.title. Then the amount here is expense amount.value. Right, not title. Then I'm gonna use the push method to push this entry to our list. And then at the bottom here, I'm just gonna go and copy the same code. It's just gonna be here income. And the same thing here, it's gonna be income. Let's try that. So I go to expense, add in a title, and then an amount, plus if I take a look on the entry list in the console, now I can find that there is something inside my array entry list. Now if we try that with the income, if I took a look on that again, it says expense, so we forgot to say type here is income. Okay, I'm gonna save that. Now let's go and after this we need to update the UI because we added a new entries, and of course we need to clear the inputs. The inputs here, a function will take in two elements, two inputs. So we put them inside an array. Same thing for adding the income. Now we're going to create the update function. And at the bottom here, the clear input function. Here it takes in inputs. So we have an array. We're going to use the for each method. Each input, we're going to set its value to an empty string. Now inside the update AI, we're going to calculate the income using the calculate total, which we didn't create yet. And here it's gonna calculate the total outcome. Now we need also to calculate the balance using the function calculate balance. This takes in the income and the outcome we calculated above. Now the function calculate total takes in the type of what we need to calculate. Is it the income or the outcome, and our list. We're going to use a for each method on our list. For each entry, if we find the entry in that list, the entry type is our type, then we're going to add up that amount to our sum, then we return the sum at the end. Now for the function calculate balance, it takes in the income and the outcome and then return the income minus the outcome. So now I will go and update the UI, which means update the inner HTML of every element. But first we need to clear all the elements or the lists. So for the clear element, it takes in an array of elements which simply use a for each method to go through all the elements and set their HTML, their inner HTML, to an empty string. Then here I will determine the sign of the balance. So let's sign equals, if I'm going to use a ternary operator, if the income is greater than or equal to the outcome, then the sign will be positive, otherwise it's going to be negative. Now I'm going to use a for each method. So for every entry in the list, we're going to see if the type is the expense type, then we're going to show that entry in the expense list. The show entry takes in as parameters the entry type, the entry title, the entry amount, and the index. Now the index here is given in the parameters for our anonymous function. I forgot to use here the right symbol. Now if it's an income there, now it's going to be the income list, and we are adding all the entries to our all list. Now we need to go and create the function show entry that takes in the list, the type, the title, the amount, and the ID, which is the index of the entry inside the entry list. Now the HTML for our entry is an li element with the ID, index of the entry, then the class name, which is the type of the entry. Then we're going to close the li tag, and then we need to show those informations, the title and also the amount. And of course I will need to show the edit button and also the delete button. I will use the insert adjacent HTML, so we need to set the position here for after began, so every new entry will be always at the top of our list. Now if I save, I go and add some entry there. Oops, I get an error here. It says element is null. What element? So it's in 123 line. So the clear element there, clear inputs. Okay, so I have to see here not that value. We just have to use the element here. So I need to remove those things, the value. You need to say expense.title and expense.amount. So this is a mistake. This is the side effect of copy paste. Now if I try that, okay, so get the same error. So inside the update UI, we call the function clear element, and it says that the element is null. It's like we didn't even selected the element. So I'm gonna go and see if I did the expense amount, the income amount, the expense title, and then the income title. So there's no problem with these elements. So I guess we have a problem with the elements there with the clear element. Yes, it's the problem is with the clear element, not the clear input. I will go to my console and check these elements here, the expense list, income list, and all list. I think that's where the problem come from. So income list is defined. Okay, the all list is null, and the expense list is also null. So I think we didn't select the right elements. So the income list. Okay, I will need to go to the HTML code. So here we said income, then we have the list there. There's no problem with the income. So here the ID is expense, then we have the list. Yeah, so we don't have to say income, we have to say expense. And here we didn't create the list. Okay, so that's where the problem come from. Now I'll get back here. So instead here we need to say expense, right? And if I save now and I hit and the plus button, you can see, but we have here another problem. We don't have the delete button. We have the entry and edit. So the problem should be inside, come from our show entry. Yeah, I didn't close the codes. So now if I check, if I test, yeah, it's there. For the income, oops, no, it doesn't take in strings. And yes, but something's wrong. It doesn't update the income and the balance and the outcome. Because I forgot to update them here. Yes, I did forget to update the income element, total element, and the outcome total element. Yeah, I really forgot that. So here I will need to edit or to update the inner HTML of the balance element. So it's gonna be the outcome element, and here the income element, income and the outcome. This is the sign we determine above, and here it's gonna be just $sign. So let's try that. Okay, unexpected token identifier. Okay, so yeah, I should have put this inside the backtick. I will save, go to the income, I will add an entry. Outcome element is not defined. I will go and see if it's not defined or not. Go to the top. Okay, we have here the income total element. Okay, lots of mistakes. So because we have a lot of elements there. Now if I save and go check that again. So if I go to the income, I can see, okay, here this, okay, if I say 01, now it's gonna be showing 011. Yes, because it takes this as a string. So we didn't use the parse and function here. So I say parse and. So we need to convert this to an integer, right? Now if I try that, 1, okay, it didn't update again. So I think I have again a problem there with the outcome. Okay, so let's try that with the income. It works just fine. The outcome it doesn't. Why not? So if I take a look on the entry list, okay, here we have 01. It's there. There's no problem with the array entry list. Why not? Oh yes, so here I have to say not outcome, it's gonna be expense, not outcome. It's my mistake. So it needs to be expense. So now if I add an entry, it's gonna be there. Now you can see that we have here a mistake, a problem. It doesn't say -1, so we're gonna use the absolute method there. Now if I add an expense, so it's now -$1. I'm gonna type in more entries. I'm gonna add some incomes and see if if everything is okay. Okay, now I will need now to add or to update the chart. So I'm gonna select the chart element using the query selector method. Then create the canvas element using the create element with the tag name canvas. Then I'm gonna set the width and the height both to 50 pixels. Now I'm gonna append the canvas to the chart element using append chart method. Now I'm gonna set, or to draw on canvas, we need to get the context of the canvas. So I'm gonna set this to a constant called context. Then the circle radius is gonna be 20 pixels. Now I'm gonna create the function draw circle. So here we need to set the stroke style, the color of the stroke. Then we need to use the begin path. Then use the method arc to draw the circle. And finally the anti-clockwise parameter. So one of the circles will go clockwise, the other one will go anti-clockwise. Then context stroke. And now the parameters are color, ratio, and anti-clockwise. Now I'm gonna try that. So here the color is white. Let's say 0.5 for the ratio and false. Now you can see that it's there, but it's really thin. So I'm gonna change the line width. I'm gonna set the line width to 8. Now if I save, you can see that now it's now thick. That's how we want it. Now if I say true, we draw the circle the other way. Now I'm gonna put this inside the function called update chart. The update chart will take in the income and the outcome. To calculate the ratio, I'm gonna use this formula which says income divided by the income plus the outcome. Now I'm gonna put this inside. This is gonna be the white color. Then this is minus ratio, a negative angle. Then the color for the outcome is gonna be red. Now if I save and try this out, I'm gonna call the function update chart 500 500 for both. Okay, so we have a problem there. I'm gonna say false. Yeah, it's gonna be 6. Okay, I'm gonna try one more time to see if that works. So as you can see, everything works just fine. Okay, now we need to clear the canvas using the clear rect method. Then I'm gonna delete this and go back to the budget.js function. And here we're gonna say update chart with Now I'm gonna try that. So if I add an expense there, so it doesn't show up because I forgot to add the income and the outcome variables or parameters there. Now if I add this, you can see that it's there. I'm gonna add the same amount for the income and everything works just fine. Now we need to set the item or save the data to our local storage using the set item. Of course, we need to stringify our array. Here I'm gonna look if there is saved data in the local storage. So I'm gonna set those data back to the entry list. If there is none, then we use an empty space, an empty array. Of course, we need to convert back those data. So if I check now, if I add something, if I refresh, okay, it's not there. Oh yeah, because I need to update the UI after I get those data back from the local storage. Now if I refresh, you can see that the income is there. So the update chart is not defined. It says the update chart is not defined. So I will go to my index.html, right? I'm going to the index.html and take back this to the top. So now you can see that the chart is there. I'm gonna add an income. If I refresh, if I close the browser and then reopen it, if we check if our data is still there, it's gonna be there. Now we will add the code to edit or to delete an entry. So we're going to add an event listener to the income list and the expense list and the all list. So on click event, we're going to call the function delete or edit. Now our function delete or edit will take in the click event as parameter. To get the clicked button, I'm gonna use the event.target. Now the entry is gonna be the parent node or the parent element of the clicked button. Now if I console log the entry here, so if I click on the button here, edit, you can see that we selected the parent node, the li, which has the ID we need. The ID is the index of the entry inside our entry list. Like we said, that's the link. Now the delete buttons I defined before, I'm going to use them here. So if the target button is delete or edit, we're going to call the edit entry. If it's delete, we're going to call the delete entry. Now I'm going to define those functions. Delete entry takes in the entry and use the splice method to remove the entry from our entry list and then update the UI. If I check that, and you can see that it works just fine. Okay, now we need to create the function edit entry. So we need to get the entry from our entry list using the ID and then check if the entry.type is the income. Then we're going to set the value of the inputs to the entry properties, amount and title. Else if the entry type is an expense here, then we're going to set the expense amount and title inputs value to the amount and title of that. This is need to be entry uppercase. Now after we're finished, we need to delete that entry from the array and the user interface. Now if I try that, if I add an expense there, so I'll add an income test 1. I will add again another expense test 2. I will add another income there, the last one. If I go to the all list, I will try to remove one of them, and here I will try to edit one of them. So I am clicking on this, but it doesn't work. So where is the problem? I'm gonna console log the entry here. So if I click on the edit, nothing shows up. So like the button doesn't work. So here I need to say .id. Okay, so now if I click on that, yes, you can see that it's now in the inputs and we updated the balance. Now I can edit and delete the entries. So that's it guys for this tutorial. If you have any ideas about projects we can create with JavaScript, please comment them below. And if you not already subscribed, please subscribe to my channel and like my video. And if you have any question, don't forget to comment below. See you guys in the next tutorial.